The words landed like a slap across my face. Loud and deliberate, designed not just to wound, but to humiliate. Garrett didn't look at me when he said it. He aimed his words past me, at the three men in tailored navy suits seated across the table. Investors. You're too stable, Alara. We need someone dynamic. Powerful ones. I caught a flicker of surprise cross one of their faces before it vanished behind boardroom polish. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I simply sat there, stone still, while the air in the room shifted. This wasn't a meeting anymore. It was an execution. My name is Alara Winscott. For 21 years, I'd been the cornerstone of Alton Skybridge's International Investment Division. I built our infrastructure portfolio from the ground up, negotiated trade deals in 3 languages, wrote the policy briefs, led the Seoul expansion project that brought these exact investors here today. I've never missed a deadline, never lost a deal, and never imagined I'd be publicly discarded in the middle of the very contract signing I spent 2 years preparing. But Garrett Cole, the newly appointed CEO, had other plans. He was sleek, marketable, 10 years younger, and 30 years bolder. He dressed like a TED Talk and talked like a headline. The board adored him. They called him visionary. What I saw was a man addicted to risk, allergic to substance, and hungry for attention. To him, I was a relic, an old system, predictable and predictable. In Garrett's world, meant disposable. The boardroom on the 47th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass table, and an open view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. Modern, elegant, deceptive, much like the company itself. Across from me, J-Ho Park, head of Pacific Sovereign Fund, raised an eyebrow. He didn't speak, but I noticed the faintest movement. His right thumb clicked something under the table. A voice recorder. My breath caught, but I kept my posture. My silence had always been my sharpest tool. Garrett leaned back in his chair, self-satisfied. "We're moving forward with a new direction," he added. I sat, nodding once. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. But deep inside, something cracked, not from pain, not from betrayal, from realization. They think this is the end. They have no idea what I've already set in motion. The door whispered shut behind me. The quiet was immediate. No footsteps followed, no apologies. Not even a courtesy glance from the assistant posted outside the conference room. I stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by polished marble and cold fluorescent lights. Beyond the glass wall, Manhattan stretched out in soft gold and steel blue. But I couldn't take in the view. I only heard his voice, still ringing in my ears. "We need someone dynamic, Alara." As if the 21 years I'd given this company were a mark of stagnation, as if knowing what I was doing made me obsolete. I took a step back from the door, inhaled slowly. There had been a moment, just one, when I thought I might say something. Anything. But what was left to say when someone decided you were finished? No negotiation, no appreciation, just erasure. It wasn't always like this. I started at Alton Skybridge as an intern. 21 years ago, I brought coffees, took notes no one read, and stayed late translating Korean supplier memos because I was the only one who could. I worked through holidays, volunteered for red-eye flights, rewrote strategy decks during layovers just to meet deadlines executives didn't even acknowledge. I wasn't the smartest in the room. Not at first. But I lasted. I learned. I listened. And I never forgot that every dollar, every deal, every client on our books was earned, not gifted. By the time I turned 35, I was VP of Global Strategy. At 40, EVP. They used to say. If Alara's on the call, the deal's already half done. Clients trusted me. I knew their languages, their customs, their politics. I remembered their kids' names. I took calls at 4 a.m. if a time zone demanded it, and somewhere along the way, I stopped needing a badge to be respected in a room. My name became enough. At least, I thought it was. I remembered one deal in particular, 5 years ago. A near collapse with a South Korean infrastructure fund. Garrett, then just a rising star in finance, had misread a clause in the tax treaty and insulted a government delegate. We were 3 hours from losing a $900 million contract, while Garrett disappeared to take a call. I asked for a translator, walked into the room, and rewrote the clause myself, by hand, on hotel stationery. I slid it across the table, bowed slightly, and didn't speak a word. The delegate signed. When I stepped out into the corridor, someone followed me. A quiet pair of footsteps, a soft voice. "If this company ever forgets your value, call me first." That voice belonged to Jae-ho Park. I hadn't thought about that moment in years. But now that I'd just been dismissed in front of him, it hit differently. The way he'd watched me today, the slight nod, the silence that followed Garrett's insult. He hadn't forgotten, and I had never forgotten what he said. I looked down at my name badge. E. Winscott, EVP, Global Strategy. The sharp serif font I used to feel proud of now felt hollow, like a title etched onto something no longer mine. I remembered the day my first business cards arrived. I carried them like sacred things. I gave one to my father, who tucked it into his wallet like a trophy. Today, I would leave without a single thank you. I had built too much to be discarded like this. And yet, here I was, another executive pushed out for being inconvenient to someone else's vision of progress. Not because I failed, but because I outlasted the men who did. Still, I didn't let the bitterness show. The elevator chimed softly. As the doors opened, I took one final glance back toward the boardroom. Garrett's voice floated out, smooth, confident, utterly unaware. He thought he'd won, but power doesn't always sit at the head of the table. Sometimes, it walks away quietly, with a memory, a promise, and a voice in her head saying, "Call me first." I didn't call. I didn't need to. The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft chime. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of the boardroom still pressing against my back. Garrett's voice was likely already filling the silence I'd left behind, eager to reclaim attention, reshape the narrative, but I also knew something had shifted. I'd seen it, not just in Jae-ho's eyes, but in the way the air held its breath after Garrett fired me. Back on the 47th floor, the meeting didn't pause for reflection. "Let's continue, shall we?" Garrett said smoothly. Already in motion as he turned toward the projection screen, the command landed flat, hanging in the air like stale smoke. The boardroom looked just as pristine as ever, glass walls, a walnut table polished to a mirror shine, ergonomic leather chairs arranged with military precision. Bottled water stood in perfect formation, untouched. The room, all light and gloss, gave no shelter to uncertainty. And yet, under the LED glow, a thick tension settled over every seat. 3 men sat across from Garrett, each one quiet but far from passive. Jae-ho Park, of course, sat in the center, hands clasped lightly on the table, expression unreadable. He hadn't taken a single note. He didn't need to. To his left was Vincent Leclerc, sharp-featured, clean-shaven, foot bouncing beneath the table as he tapped an idle rhythm against his thigh. A tick-born nod of impatience, but calculation. To the right, Samir Day, measured, observant. A silk pocket square folded so precisely it looked untouched by air. He glanced at his watch once, then didn't look again. None of them asked about me. None of them had to. They'd all seen what happened, and they were all waiting to see what Garrett would do next. The door opened with a soft knock. In stepped a young woman, early 20s, hair in a tight low bun, blouse tucked into pressed navy slacks. She moved quietly, carrying a tray of water and 2 manila folders. Callie, the new executive assistant. Garrett didn't acknowledge her. He pointed lazily at the table. Place them here, quietly. She obeyed. But as she moved between chairs, her eyes flicked across the room, not at Garrett, but at the empty chair where I'd sat only minutes ago. Her gaze lingered, then dropped. And then, just before she set a glass in front of Jay-Ho, she gave the subtlest nod toward my vacant seat. It lasted less than a second, but Jay-Ho saw it. He didn't react outwardly, no shift in posture, no raised brow. But his hand, which had been resting still, curled slightly at the fingertips. Callie turned, expression unreadable, and made her way to the back of the room, toward the print station. Garrett continued speaking, flipping through a slide deck on market impact projections. His voice filled the space, but it didn't settle. Samir cut in. Clause 12B, he said. Who finalized it? Garrett faltered just long enough to notice. We had internal revisions earlier this week, he replied. Nothing significant. Vincent leaned forward. That clause was a point of contention 6 months ago. We were told Winscott handled the reconciliation. Garrett's smile tightened. Yes, well, we're moving in a new direction now. No one responded. No one agreed. And in the silence that followed, Callie bent beside the printer. From her blazer pocket, she slipped out a small silver USB. She knelt to the paper tray, pretending to adjust the feed, but her other hand inserted the USB into the side port of the device. A small light blinked once, twice, then held steady. No one noticed. Except the camera above the conference table. Garrett pressed the clicker, revealing a slide titled, Partnership Vision 2025. But the eyes in the room weren't on the screen. Jay-Ho's remained on the manila folder. Vincent's fingers drummed once, then stopped. Samir looked down, then slowly raised his gaze, not at Garrett, but at the glass wall where my reflection had once hovered. And Callie, now back at her post by the water tray, brushed a loose hair behind her ear and waited. Inside the printer, the transfer was complete. A second file had been queued for release. The next page that would come out? It didn't bear the Alton Skybridge logo. It bore mine. Winscott Stratagem LLC. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, sealing off the boardroom and the past 21 years of my life, with a hiss. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. Instead, I took out my phone, thumb hovering over a single-word message I'd written but never sent. Now, no punctuation, no emotion, just a trigger. The clock on my screen read 2:49 p.m. I hit send. To understand what that text meant, you'd have to go back 6 months, back to the moment I stopped being an employee and started becoming something else. The project was called Southgate Solar, an 18-month cross-continental green energy initiative I'd spent every waking hour shaping. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud, but it was revolutionary. A 3-party investment alignment between Seoul, Singapore, and the U.S., with projected returns nearing $4.6 billion over 10 years. It was nearly ready for signature, until Garrett canceled it in a single sentence. Doesn't have the edge, he said, waving a dismissive hand at the charts I'd spent days compiling. We need something viral, loud, something bold. I had blinked at him, stunned. But the data! Ilara! He cut me off. You're great with numbers, but numbers don't make waves. Vision does. He walked out of the room without waiting for a reply. Later that day, I learned he'd pulled me from the board presentation. I was removed from all related communications. The project, just like me, was scrubbed from visibility. That was the moment I stopped defending what I built and started protecting what I was going to build next. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from Jay-Ho Park in a quiet izakaya tucked beneath a subway line in Brooklyn. He was in town to guest lecture at Columbia. I hadn't planned to ask him for anything, just clarity instead. He asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "What would you do," he said, "if you didn't need their permission?" I sipped my sack slowly, eyes fixed on the rising steam. "I'd build something real," I said, "but quietly, strategically." He smiled. "Then let's do that. Together." That night, we laid the foundation for a new entity, Winscott Stratagem LLC. It wasn't a shell, it was a structure, tight, clean, legal, registered in Delaware under my name. I purchased the .global domain the next morning, filed operating documents under a secured digital vault, where I alone held the encryption key. Jeho provided the initial capital. I provided the architecture, every clause, every contingency, crafted for one eventuality. What if I was pushed out? And now, at 2:49 p.m., as I walked through the glass atrium of Alton Skybridge for what they thought would be the last time, that eventuality had arrived. The message "now" didn't need elaboration. It activated a cascade. Digital notifications sent to our legal team, escrow agents, and back-channel investor reps in Singapore. A timer began on the contingency clause, written into the alternative agreement. If I was removed from Alton Skybridge without written cause, control of the $2.1 billion deal would automatically shift to Winscott Stratagem. And the best part, Garrett had signed off on the fallback clause himself, 3 months ago, buried inside a vendor neutrality compliance memo he didn't bother reading. He thought it was just legal padding. He didn't realize he'd signed away the right to be the one in the room when the deal closed. My phone buzzed. McKinney LLP. Files authenticated. Transfer in progress. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket, stepped out into the wind. I wasn't angry. I wasn't rattled. This wasn't vengeance. It was design. You see, I never needed to fight Garrett. I just needed to wait long enough for him to believe I wouldn't. I stepped out into the wind, coat flaring behind me as the revolving glass door of Alton Skybridge spun shut at my back. My phone vibrated once inside my pocket. McKinney LLP. Transfer in progress. Contract override pending clause confirmation. I didn't smile. Not yet. There was no joy in revenge. Only the deep, centering satisfaction of a plan unfolding exactly as it was meant to. They thought I left with nothing. What they didn't know was that everything they still thought they owned had already been moved beneath them. Quietly. Legally. This was never about dramatic exits or slamming doors. This was about architecture. 6 months ago, in a quiet Brooklyn restaurant tucked under the rumble of the J train, Jeho Park and I had drafted the outline of something new, over miso and seaweed. We began what Garrett would have called an obsolete idea. We called it Winscott Stratagem LLC. He wanted scale. We wanted structure. He wanted noise. We wanted precision. In less than 2 weeks, I had hired a small, specialized law firm in Delaware known for structuring discrete entities for sovereign partners. No branding, no boardroom press, just airtight control and flexibility built into every clause. The company was registered under my full legal name. I was the sole managing member. Jeho was a silent financial partner, visible nowhere on public documents. Our digital infrastructure was hosted through a private registrar. The global domain was paid in full for 10 years. I owned it. And most importantly, we added a contingency clause. It was buried inside an alternate execution pathway contract, a legal mechanism allowing the investors to redirect their deal to Winscott Stratagem if I was removed from Alton Skybridge without legal cause. Not performance-based, not scandal-driven, just displaced. It was quiet, surgical, like snapping a fuse that rerouted the entire system. It wouldn't activate unless Garrett did something stupid. He did. 3 months ago, I submitted a bundled compliance memo through legal, a 43-page document covering vendor independence, conflict clauses, and commercial integrity in foreign negotiations. It looked routine, tedious. Inside that bundle, Appendix 3C contained the very clause that would undo him. In the event of unjustified removal of Ms. Elara Winscott from her senior executive role, investment authorization shall shift, upon execution, to the alternate entity named Winscott Stratagem LLC, with full rights retained. The signature line was forwarded to Gar. He didn't read it. He barely scanned the cover page. He signed it electronically with a lazy swipe and replied, "Looks like legal wrote a novel," stamping and moving on. Then he sent a smiley face emoji. I kept that email, back in the present. I crossed the street slowly. Traffic blared. A siren wailed in the distance. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the noise without flinching. My body wasn't tense anymore. My mind wasn't racing. I had already made peace with this moment months ago. This wasn't rebellion. It was realignment. A quiet rebirth, not out of rage, but out of clarity. I remembered the night I worked with the Delaware attorneys finalizing the ownership structure, the way the air smelled of printer ink and midnight coffee, how the lead counsel looked me in the eye and said, "Ms. Winscott, you realize if this clause is triggered, it overrides everything?" And I answered, "That's the point." Inside my phone, the transfer timer counted down. The clock read 2:49 p.m. when I sent the message. Now, less than 10 minutes later, every digital switch Garrett thought he controlled had already begun rerouting. Not because I hacked anything, because I built it right. He just never bothered to ask whose name was on the foundation. As I approached my waiting car, the building behind me glistened under the sharp New York sun. Glass, steel, and borrowed power. A hollow fortress. It used to feel like home. Now it looked like a monument to someone else's arrogance, and as I closed the car door, I whispered, not to the driver, not to J-Ho, not to anyone in particular. Let the signature land where it belongs. The car door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't tell the driver to move. Through the tinted window, I could still see Alton Skybridge's front entrance. Garrett was standing beneath the awning, phone in one hand, the other stuffed casually in his pocket like none of this mattered. He was probably texting someone about how smooth it all went, how clean, how swift, how final. "Would you like to head out, Ms. Winscott?" the driver asked. I didn't answer right away. My fingers curled around the folder in my lap, thick, white, and weighty with something sharper than paper. "Not yet," I said. I stepped out into the late afternoon air. The city hummed around me, loud and oblivious, but inside I was a blade drawn tight. I re-entered the building through the side entrance. Bypassing the lobby, my badge still worked. They hadn't deactivated it. Yet. I found him in the west hallway, just outside the boardroom. He was alone, scrolling through his phone with the same distracted charm he wore like cologne. When he looked up and saw me, his eyebrows lifted with amusement. Not alarm. "Elara," he said, smiling like he was greeting an old friend. "Didn't think you'd hang around. Brave." I didn't speak. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, you've done great, really. But let's be honest, this game's moved beyond your generation." He let that sink in before adding, "Maybe it's time you rest." Rest. He said it so easily, like I was a racehorse ready to be put down. My jaw clenched. I felt the burn of heat behind my eyes, the weight of 21 years pressing against my ribcage. My fingers tightened around the folder until the edges creased into my palm. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. Garrett mistook my silence for surrender. He leaned back slightly, smug. "You know, there's a grace in stepping aside, knowing when to..." But I'd stopped listening. In my mind. I heard him again. "This game's moved beyond your generation." And I remembered the first time I'd been told I was too traditional for a new market initiative. I'd kept quiet then. 2. 3 weeks later, I'd restructured the model and saved the company $47 million in lost returns. I had never needed noise to prove my point. In my hands was the final version of the contract Garrett believed was being finalized for investor signatures. What he didn't know was that I'd quietly had my attorneys revise 3 key clauses over the past month. Clauses that shifted the authority of oversight, licensing, and residual share from the office of the CEO to the executive of record at time of origin. That record was me. Garrett's name had been struck, his residual shares revoked, his signature power nullified. He hadn't noticed because the revised documents were circulated quietly through legal, under the guise of a formatting update, something he'd approved last week with the words, "Looks fine, just clean it up." He never read the footnotes, and now I stood here holding the very weapon he had handed me, signed, dated, and fully binding. Garrett gestured toward the folder. "I assume you're turning that in?" I stepped forward and placed it in his hands. He took it without a second glance, flipping it open, scanning the first page casually. "You're efficient, I'll give you that," he said, already distracted. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in farewell. Then I turned, walked away, and left him standing alone under the same glass ceiling he thought would hold forever. Back at the elevator, I pulled out my phone. A new notification blinked on the screen. Clause 12, override accepted. Garrett's name removed. I locked the screen without reading the rest. He had given me permission to disappear. I had given myself permission to return. I stepped back into the boardroom through the side corridor. The same one I used to enter when I ran these meetings. The room was already in motion again, voices low, papers being shuffled. Garrett commanding the space with the polish of a man who thought the show was already his. No one turned as I entered. No one gestured for me to sit. The chair I used to occupy, center seat, top of the table, was no longer mine. I stood by the far wall, near the credenza where the coffee thermoses sat untouched. Garrett glanced my way, then offered a brief nod, like I was a guest in my own house. "You're welcome to observe," he said smoothly, from the side. Then he turned back to the group, as if I were already fading from the room. She was already in my seat. Natalie Kim, newly appointed Partner Strategy Director, as Garrett had just announced. She looked polished, poised. 30, maybe. Sleek black suit, posture crisp, voice full of the kind of certainty only someone who hasn't yet been tested can carry. "This marks a new chapter," Garrett said. "Natalie will lead the remaining coordination. She's fluent in Korean and understands the evolving investor mindset." I watched her place her laptop down on the table, on top of the materials I had printed, highlighted, indexed. She glanced at me briefly, not in disrespect, but as if I were part of the decor, a framed memory. I felt nothing, not because it didn't sting, but because I had already bled out long ago. That chair used to mean something, not just a seat, it was history. The first time I sat there. I was 36, the only woman in the room. I had a stack of notes, a translator in my ear, and a stomach twisted into knots. But I did it. I earned that place, day by day, deal by deal, and I had held it with grace, until today. Now. No one asked if I wanted my seat back. No one offered a glance. They had moved on before I had stood up. But I stood quietly, hands resting on the back of an empty chair along the wall. There's a power in not begging, in not breaking, in watching while they pretend you no longer matter. I could have spoken. I could have corrected the numbers Natalie was quoting, the phrasing Garrett was spinning, but I didn't. Let them play their game. I already owned the board. A quiet movement beside me. Callie, the assistant, approached from behind, a folder in one hand, a tray of water in the other. She paused as she handed me the folder I had previously reviewed. Just a routine motion, polite, unnoticed. But as she passed it into my hands, I felt the whisper of paper slipping between the pages, too light to be an official document. She didn't look at me. I waited until she'd walked away, then opened the folder slowly. Inside, folded in half, was a thin slip of notepaper, handwritten in small, neat letters. Folder 3 is missing. I read it twice. My eyes didn't widen. My face didn't change. But inside, something shifted. Folder 3 wasn't a generic tab in a binder. It was the folder, the strategic appendix, the compliance lock-in for FCI recognition, the file that verified international mutuality standards, required for sovereign funds like JHOs to legally sign. Without it, the deal couldn't be executed. Any signature on the main contract would be meaningless. A facade. And that folder had vanished. It wasn't an accident. Not with Garrett in charge. He either withheld it, intentionally, or someone else did. For a reason I hadn't yet seen. But Callie had. She knew what was missing. And she'd chosen to tell me. At the head of the table, Garrett continued. Unaware. JHO sat still. Samir checked his watch. Vincent tapped his pen, his gaze flicking between pages. Waiting. No one noticed when I pulled out my phone. I typed a draft message. Just 2 lines. Missing folder 3. I have it. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. I watched Natalie lean forward, smile too brightly, and flip to the next page of her briefing deck. Let them have my chair. I still held the missing piece. I was still standing near the wall when Garrett checked his watch and cleared his throat. Let's move forward, he said. Then, without even turning toward me, we'll proceed without EVP Winscott. That was it. No thank you. No mention of 21 years. Just a formal strike-through across a name he hadn't earned the right to erase. I didn't flinch. The words didn't sting. Not anymore. They were simply confirmation, proof that the moment had arrived, the moment I had been building toward, in silence, for months. He thought it was the end. For me, it was the signal. I didn't move right away. I stood still for a few seconds longer, letting the quiet settle into the space. No one said a word. The investors glanced toward Garrett, then back to their notes. I stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate. I made my way around the conference table, not toward Garrett, but toward the men who actually mattered. JHO looked up first. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes didn't waver. I gave a slight bow of my head. He returned it. Samir gave a polite nod, tapping his pen lightly as if he were making mental notes. Vincent tilted his head slightly and raised one brow. Acknowledgement without commitment. I didn't expect warmth. I didn't need it. Each gesture said enough. They saw me. They knew what had just happened. They also knew it wasn't over. I turned to leave. That's when I saw Callie, standing near the corner of the room where the printer hummed quietly. She wasn't watching the men at the table. She was watching me. I walked toward her, still holding the folder she'd handed me earlier. She stood still as I approached, her fingers brushing the corner of a new stack of documents. When I reached her, I didn't speak. I simply extended one hand and gently rested it over hers. She didn't flinch. She looked me directly in the eyes, and then, slowly, she nodded. It lasted less than 2 seconds. A gesture so small, it could have been missed entirely, but it wasn't. Above us, in the corner of the room, a small lens blinked red. The conference room's recording system was always running during investor sessions. Company policy, wide angle, high resolution, audio capable. It caught everything. That final glance, that silent nod, that brief, human moment between 2 women on opposite sides of a room run by men who thought they were the only ones in charge. I turned away. As I walked toward the exit, no one called after me. No one rushed to stop me. Garrett said nothing. Natalie didn't look up. The air felt strangely still, like a museum before opening. I wasn't part of the exhibit anymore. I was already becoming something else. The hallway outside was quiet. My heels tapped softly against the polished tile as I walked away from the table I'd once anchored. A flicker of movement caught my eye. On the far wall, a digital clock above the security display changed. 3:04 p.m. The exact time he said it. The exact time I left. I paused for half a heartbeat. That was the moment they thought they had silenced me. They didn't know it was the moment I'd stepped into position. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. I stepped inside, alone, and pressed the button for the lobby. As they closed, I took out my phone. The draft message still sat unsent on the screen. Missing folder Shubrdu 3. I have it. I didn't hesitate. This time, I hit send. Not to Garrett, not to the legal team, but to the one person who had been waiting for the signal. In that instant, everything began to shift. From the outside, it looked like I had walked out. But in truth, I had just quietly taken the reins. Let them keep the chair. I kept the leverage. The elevator began its slow descent. I stood alone. The silence around me, dense but oddly calming. My phone buzzed once in my palm. McKinney LLP, standing by. I didn't reply. I already knew what came next. Inside my leather tote, tucked between a notebook and a sealed backup drive, was something Callie had slipped me without a word, without a glance. Now, in the quiet cocoon of brushed steel and faint elevator hum, I reached in and retrieved it. It was a thick cream-colored envelope, sealed with deep red wax. No name, no instructions, just a single embossed W in the center, pressed clean and silent like a whisper meant only for me. I turned it over in my hands once, then carefully broke the seal. The wax cracked softly. It felt like breaking glass in a museum. Inside was folder 3, the missing piece, the original version. Not a photocopy, not an attachment, the real thing. I pulled it out slowly, heart steady, hands practiced. Along with the folder was a small silver USB stick and a yellow slip of paper. On it, in Callie's elegant print, were 2 handwritten words. It's clean. Folder 3 was no ordinary document. It was the Sovereign Compliance Appendix, an international regulatory linchpin for all cross-border investment transactions. Without it, no foreign-backed deal could be finalized. Period. It was also the only file in the entire contract package that contained the intergovernmental clause protections, oversight jurisdiction language, and multi-party accountability chain. In short, no folder 3, no legitimacy, not in Seoul, not in Singapore, and definitely not in New York. And I had it. I set the folder gently against the handrail and turned my attention to the USB. I plugged it into my secured tablet, which was linked to an encrypted transfer portal developed with McKinney's legal tech team. As it powered on, my reflection caught in the darkened screen. I didn't look like someone who'd been fired 20 minutes ago. I looked like someone mid-move in a very old game. I opened the file package on the drive. Inside were 8 documents, each embedded with invisible watermarking, blockchain-authenticated timestamp signatures, and digital reference anchors tied to my company's internal registry, Winscott Stratagem LLC. The name appeared in the footer of every page, not in bold, not screaming, but fixed, coded, unremovable. Each document was locked with legal integrity software. Any attempt to alter company name, signature authority, or compliance terms would auto-trigger a failsafe, signature invalidation, and formal voiding of contract status. Garrett and Natalie didn't know that. They were sitting upstairs with a beautiful binder and a missing lung. I checked the timestamp. 3:11 p.m. I tapped send. Immediately, the packet began uploading to 3 destinations: McKinney LLP, who would timestamp and certify submission, our digital vault in Delaware, ensuring full legal traceability, my own internal server, under triple authenticated access with offline backup redundancy within seconds. The transfer completed. The folder they thought had vanished was now the only version that could make the contract legally binding. Everything else, whatever Garrett had, whatever Natalie was flipping through upstairs, was nothing more than presentation, a performance with no weight. I exhaled slowly and powered off the tablet. The folder, now slightly creased at the edge, sat neatly beside me again. I tucked it back into my bag, alongside the USB. My hand brushed the yellow slip from Callie. I folded it and slid it into my coat pocket. As the elevator neared the lobby, the doors made a soft ding. I looked at the digital clock above the panel. 3:12 p.m. The game had changed. I stepped out into the marble atrium with the same measured calm I'd walked in with, except this time, I owned the signature, and the silence around me wasn't defeat. It was control. The door to conference room 47 slid shut behind me. Upstairs, the meeting was still going. On paper, I was no longer in it, but reality was beginning to shift, because the only name missing from the contract was also the only name it needed to survive. And they were just about to learn that. Garrett had returned to the head of the table like nothing had happened, lips stretched thin into something that pretended to be a smile. He clasped his hands, nodded at the investors as if his little stunt hadn't just left an echo in the walls. "Well," he said, tapping the contract binder, "now that we've removed some of the legacy, friction, shall we continue?" He glanced toward Jae-ho. Jae-ho didn't open the binder, didn't even touch it. Instead, he slowly closed the slim laptop in front of him, then reached into his inner jacket pocket and retrieved his phone. Garrett cleared his throat. "Mr. Park?" But Jae-ho didn't answer. He turned away from the table, walked 2 slow paces to the glass wall, and placed the call. Everyone in the room heard it. "Proceeding with the alternate agreement," he said calmly. "My confidence lies elsewhere." The silence that followed was instantaneous. Samir put down his pen. Vincent's mouth opened slightly, then shut again. Natalie, across the room, began rifling through the deal folder with a subtle panic that didn't escape notice. Garrett stood up. "What alternate agreement, Mr. Park? I'm not sure I understand what—" Jae-ho turned. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger, just clarity. "This version of the deal cannot be ratified without Ms. Winscott's designation," he said. "She has legal authority over the sovereign compliance provisions." Garrett laughed. "Hollow. We can update those. It's a formality. I'm the acting CEO. I have override." "No, you don't." Jae-ho's words cut clean. "And I am not here in my personal capacity." He took a slow breath, then finished. "I represent 4 primary stakeholders, strategic investors who have written clauses requiring unanimous consent on cross-border terms." Garrett blinked. "You're saying they won't approve this without her?" "They won't even consider it," Jae-ho replied. He paused. "When Ms. Winscott stepped away just now, this contract became invalid. She didn't just carry her folder, she carried your leverage." Garrett looked around the room. Natalie shook her head. "We're missing folder 3, she whispered, her face pale. "The signature chain can't be finalized without it." "She took that?" Garrett hissed. "No," Jae-ho said. "She kept it. There's a difference." At that moment, a soft chime echoed through the room. An email notification popped up on the conference screen. From McKinney LLP. Subject, Winscott Stratagem LLC. Contract submission confirmed at 3:12 p.m. Everyone read it, and everyone understood. Garrett slumped back into his seat. "Are you saying this whole meeting was pointless?" he muttered, his voice cracking. Jae-ho walked toward the exit, but stopped just short of the door. He turned slightly, his voice low, almost conversational. "I told her once, years ago, if this company ever forgets her value, She should call me first. He didn't smile. He simply left. The door closed behind him. The room didn't move. The chair at the head of the table was still warm from Garrett's performance, but the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. The binder in front of him suddenly looked decorative, expensive, useless. The only deal left standing was no longer theirs. And the only name on it was mine. The glass doors of McKinney LLP whispered shut behind me. No one greeted me with applause. No banners, no cameras. Oh, just a quiet receptionist who nodded once and motioned toward conference room C. For a moment, I stood in the hallway, taking in the polished floor, the low hum of air conditioning, the faint scent of leather-bound documents and ink, the kind of place where real decisions happened. My heels clicked across the marble. Each step felt heavier than the last, but not because I doubted the choice. It was the weight of history shifting. Mine. Inside the room, 3 people were waiting: a transactional attorney from McKinney and 2 representatives from the private equity firms. All 3 rose when I entered, not out of politeness but respect. "Ms. Winscott," the attorney said, gesturing toward the head of the table. "We're ready when you are." I took my seat. The contract lay open in front of me. No red lines, no edits. This was the final version, the one I'd built in silence, stitched together piece by piece after Garrett dismantled everything I'd once been proud of. There, on the signature page, was a line that hadn't existed 3 days ago. Authorized legal representative, Winscott Stratagem, LLC, Ilera Winscott. I picked up the pen. Garrett's words echoed faintly in the back of my mind. This game's moved beyond your generation. And yet, here I was, holding the ink that would end it. With one slow breath, I signed. The lawyer leaned forward, inspecting the signature. "Valid and time-stamped," he said. "We'll upload and notify counsel." Across the table, one of the investment reps, the same man who once challenged my credibility in a boardroom 10 years ago, offered a faint nod. "You're the only reason we trusted this deal," he said. "That hasn't changed." At exactly 3:29 p.m., the final file was submitted to all signatories via secure system. The assistant clicked Send. An automated email was triggered through the legal server. Subject: Deal complete. Legal representative: Ilera Winscott. Timestamp: 3:29 p.m. Contract encrypted. Under Winscott Stratagem, LLC access rights. Exclusive somewhere on the 57th floor of Alton Skybridge headquarters. Garrett received the notification. Garrett had been pacing. Natalie stood awkwardly near the door, holding her tablet. The meeting had fallen apart 30 minutes ago, but the implications were still unraveling. None of the 3 investors had signed. The folder Ilara carried, the one they had all dismissed, had apparently contained more than just paperwork. It carried control. An alert chimed on Garrett's laptop. He clicked it, expecting a delay notice, maybe some legal feedback, but then he read it, out loud. Final contract recorded under Winscott Stratagem, LLC. IP rights auto-voided under Clause 8.3b. Legal authority transferred. He froze, eyes scanning faster now. Clause 8.3, that's... he muttered. Natalie looked up. The fallback clause you initialed 2 months ago, the one embedded in the commercial risk disclosures. "You mean the one no one reads?" he snapped. "You signed it." In 2 short minutes, Garrett had gone from dismissive to desperate. His laptop now displayed an irreversible chain of authorizations, none of which bore his name. And one name on every page: Ilera Winscott. He muttered something under his breath. Natalie didn't answer. She'd already turned away, her silence louder than any scolding. He slumped into his chair, breathing shallow. The contract he'd bragged about for weeks had just walked out the front door, with the only woman he'd underestimated enough to fire in front of 3 investors. And the worst part? There was no undo button. Back at McKinney LLP. The lawyer closed the folder and nodded. "Congratulations," he said. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. Instead, I stood up, gathered my coat, and turned to the glass wall overlooking the avenue. Below, people walked like nothing had changed. And maybe for them, it hadn't. But for me, this wasn't revenge. It wasn't victory. It was something rarer. Control. The sliding doors at Alton Skybridge opened with a familiar hiss. For 21 years, I had walked in and out of this building without ever thinking twice. But now, walking back in, not as an EVP, not as an employee, but as a free woman, I noticed everything. The echo of heels across polished stone, the artificial calm of piped-in music, the cold smile from reception, the security badge that no longer recognized me. And none of it mattered. I didn't come to reclaim anything. I came to walk through. One last time, on my own terms, near the revolving glass entrance. I spotted her, Callie. She was holding an iPad, but not really using it, just standing there, fidgeting with the corner of her sleeve like she'd been waiting. Our eyes met. She didn't smile. Neither did I. I didn't want to be like them, she said quietly. I nodded, stepping closer, laying a light hand over hers for just a second. You weren't. No thanks were spoken. None were needed. She had made her choice, quietly, bravely, and at the perfect moment. That kind of integrity doesn't need a stage, just a witness. I turned to leave, but something flickered on the digital news panel behind the front desk. The headline rotated up slowly, as if it had been waiting for me to see it. Investor switches sides. Winscott leads. 2.1B deal my name. In full capital letters. For the first time. Not attached to someone else's legacy. Not buried in the fine print. Not shared. Just mine. A few people near the lobby glanced at the screen, murmuring. One man took out his phone to snap a photo. Two junior analysts whispered to each other. I didn't stop walking. There was nothing left in that building for me to hold on to. As I passed the mirrored wall in the east corridor, one I used to rush by without thinking, I slowed just enough to catch my own reflection. I looked different now. Not younger, not prettier, not polished, but full. There's a particular kind of stillness that settles in after you've been underestimated for too long and finally proven, without raising your voice, that you were never the problem. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. I stood there for a moment and looked straight into my own eyes. For the first time in a long while. I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. Not Garrett, not the board, not the version of me that once shrank to fit their mold. I nodded to my reflection. Not a celebration, just recognition. And then I kept walking. The security guard at the door didn't speak. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he did. Maybe it didn't matter. Outside, the city was moving as always, honking horns, laughing pedestrians, coffee cups clutched in gloved hands. Another Tuesday in a world that forgets people like me exist, until we change everything. And I had. I didn't need to look back to know it. Sometimes the most powerful victories don't come with applause. They come in the quiet, in knowing who you are, even after they try to erase you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told your time is up, your voice too soft, your style too steady, remember this. You don't have to shout to be heard. Just stand, just stay, just own your worth. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever walked away stronger after being underestimated? If you felt Alara's journey, give this story a like. Don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories of courage, dignity, and quiet revenge. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder. Power doesn't always wear a name tag. We'll see you in the next story.